Hey everybody, Neil McLeod here again with Fractional Exec. Here's the second half of my conversation with Anshu AI. The first one was about agents. This one talks a little bit more about the competitive landscape, whether we should be open and closed or public or private, and a little bit about infrastructure as well. So enjoy, feel free to comment or add feedback, and have a great week.
We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit more about like what's going on in the global competitive landscape. So a couple weeks ago, DeepSeek from China comes out, and then it captures all the headlines. It has a actual market, financial market impact. People are freaking out, like, oh wow, they've trained the model off of OpenAI or ChatGPT, and what's happening now? Is this a threat to sort of the competitive landscape in the U.S.? And I haven't used it yet, so I don't know if you have, but in any case, what's your take on how it compares, and should companies in the US be concerned about that?
So DeepSeek, it's been called sort of like the Sputnik moment in the AI race. And they say they built their model for only $5.6 million. For context, Llama cost about 20 or $30 million to train. And they built this using less powerful chips because of the US export controls. In terms of benchmarking results, it's right up there with all the top dogs. If you go to one of these like crowdsourced leaderboards, you'll see it's like Google, OpenAI, and then DeepSeek. So they have built something that is really powerful and impressive. I do think the size of the leap has been overblown. So that $5.6 million is the cost of the final run only. It doesn't include the cost of buying or renting the chips. It doesn't include the cost of all the iterations and experimentation it did. It really may just be the cost to run the chips. None of these guys, none of these players used the same benchmark to provide numbers. So it can just be really hard to interpret, like, how much did this really cost? Like, there is some opacity, like, baked into information that's out there. So what does that really mean, I guess? But I think beyond that, it leveraged learnings from all the open source that is work that is out there, all those open source models. So for example, DeepSeek uses a mixture of experts model, which, the idea behind that is it only uses part of the network at any given time for a given query so that it's computationally efficient. That is a methodology that was first employed by Mistral. It's leveraging a lot of what's out there. And moreover, as you kind of noted, this is a distilled model. It's likely a distilled model. A distilled model is a model that's trained on another teacher model because that teacher model has done a lot of the work to learn the basics. The student model is much cheaper to train, and that saves a lot of costs. In this case, it's distilled off of Llama or possibly OpenAI, although that is like in contention, but I think most people think that is the case. And if you open up three windows, let's say OpenAI, DeepSeek, and another LLM, like I did Claude, you will see that DeepSeek responses pretty closely mirror ChatGPT. So, take that for what it's worth. So with all of that said, I mean, I think it's of course a concern, but was there ever really any doubt that China wasn't too far behind? I think this just means they're closer than we thought they were. It is definitely a reminder. It's a reminder that bigger isn't always better. I think that was a kind of a path in the US that we were going down, which was like, let's just like build a $500 billion, supercompute center. And it's like building efficiently has value. And I think it's a good check. And with all that said, I think DeepSeek is an impressive implementation, and it is an open source model. So I think it's definitely a case to learn from.
Yeah, that reminds me of something like a quote that I've heard in the past, that limitations or constraints are always the best friends of architecture. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about how they were like, all right, how can we do this fast and cheap and make it just as good? And they seem to have done that. But I just don't know, and maybe you could just give me your take on, now that we have a China model that's equivalent or close, and they're going to compete, what does that mean for us? Because we in the US have a policy from the standpoint of the current administration saying we want to dominate the AI space. China obviously is a player now. So what does that mean for AI leadership globally? And is it going to look similar to Alibaba versus Google did, 20 years ago?
China's been a part of the AI race for some time now. Like that, like Alibaba has had models. There are other companies from China that have had models that are relatively competitive. I mean, I think DeepSeek, given the price and the performance, is really stands out. I think now we would say, instead of thinking like, oh, maybe they're a year behind, really it looks more like they're 3 to 6 months behind. Yeah, I mean, it's a race. Does the US still have a clear edge? Yes, for sure. I mean, like as we talked about, the LLMs are one piece, but then you layer on top of it the agents, the robots, puts us still in a good place.
So talk to me about like the cost, because I pay $20 a month for ChatGPT. I have access, probably because I've been playing around with it, to the latest Gemini model without paying for it yet. But that's $20 a month. I think Claude's $20 a month. There's a model out there that you can now pay $200 a month for,
Yeah,
from
OpenAI.
OpenAI. So, like, what does this mean? Are we kind of trying to figure out price points and monetization, and
Yeah.
what's that look like?
Yeah, I like, right. It does seem like everyone's sort of approaching pricing differently, and they are like sort of that price sensitivity. Like it's not at this point well understood. Like with DeepSeek being, open source, like you're still paying for tokens. At this point, I like this I think is still being figured out. I don't think DeepSeek being out there has like really changed, any pricing strategies. So yeah, I see this one as sort of being an ongoing, experiment on what pricing works. But you can definitely see that the big industry leaders are trying to make it available for consumers to use. This one, it's not totally my expertise area, but I think I think the prices that we're seeing now, it's gonna sort of stay in that range.
What about openness? Like we've got this World Wide Web that everyone has access to, and there isn't necessarily a specific price point associated with it. Do you see AI evolving in that way, where it's fully open, or do you think there's going to be like that pay to play model, and it's going to be closed for specific scenarios and use cases? Even if we don't know specifically how the pricing will play out, do you feel like there's going to be use cases for both open access and closed access?
Yeah, I mean, it does sort of seem like the way, you see models out there that are closed, like OpenAI is closed, Google's products are closed, Llama is open, there's a bunch of other open products. And this industry came up as like this pure research area, right? It was like this complete like moonshot for the last 15 years. Like I know, working in this field, like I was on the machine learning side, and we looked at these guys like at DeepMind, like, okay, that's like some pie in the sky research stuff. So there are so many research papers. The community, it was a research community, and they all worked together. And I think that is fundamentally still there as an underpinning. These are really bright people that want to learn from each other. I think that is something that we can be hopeful about. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a mix. I definitely think it's going to be a mix. I also, again, to plug public AI a little bit, like as people invest in public AI infrastructures, even if we're sort of like a little bit behind the state of the art, it's like we're in the mix. And as you kind of said, it's like you make do with what you have. Necessity is the mother of invention, and things can be used accordingly. So I think it's going to be a mix. I definitely think it will be a mix.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's funny that you say OpenAI is closed. It's kind of a weird thing to think about. It started as a nonprofit, with the idea of being open, and then became, let's monetize this. And they're still trying to figure it out, which piece of it's nonprofit, which piece of it might be monetized business. And so that's a funny thing to say. So the last section here then is like, what infrastructure is necessary to support this? Because you mentioned something about, big, massive data centers, the cost of supporting those, and energy consumption, and what it's going to require for us to support these models and tools as we go forward, because it's going to continue to grow and grow, consumption and usage. So what does that look like from your perspective, and how do companies sort of address that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like this is also seen in the news quite a lot. I mean, these running these models and the data centers that support them cost a lot of money, and they take up and use a lot of power. So it's like, as we're trying to get more and more green, here it is, this new technology that is using up more and more power, and that is a big concern. That's something people don't like. So I did like taking a look at this. Data center electricity is, it takes up about 1% of global energy demand at this point. It is expected to go all the way up to 3% by 2030. So that is significant. I think, if you're thinking, and then if you focus on the US, I think it's more like, 2 or 3% now and going up to 8%. So it is significant. But, in terms of like, is it the lion's share of electricity or power? It's not. It does mean that it's an important consideration. It's still not the biggest thing out there. So in terms of like, what is it, to run these systems, the data center, you are running chips, the chips need to be cooled. There's a lot that goes on with the data center. And so there is a lot of work going on with energy and efficiency improvements. You can think about things like hardware optimization. NVIDIA and other chip makers are thinking about how to make more energy efficient AI chips, how they can build their hardware, like configure and build their hardware in a way to reduce power consumption. Thinking about building smarter data centers that use AI itself to optimize cooling, to do some predictive maintenance. And there's a lot, interestingly enough, a lot with strategic data center placement too. So like, where can you put it so you are minimizing energy consumption? I will, again, talk about New York here and our public AI infrastructure, which we're building. Because we have the Niagara Falls, our data center is completely hydropowered. It is, positioned in flow, and we have that as an option. So that, it's just something, it's because it's like, oh yeah, that matters a lot. Piggybacking on that is clean energy sources. So how can we incorporate renewables? This is including like on-site solar, wind power. And then I think the other big one in terms of clean energy is nuclear. So one of the big innovations of the moment are these small modular reactors, SMRs. These SMRs are advanced nuclear fission reactors. They are about 1/3 capacity of a traditional nuclear plant. They are compact in size. They are modularly designed, so they're easier to transport, easy to increment. They have greater safety features because they're smaller. They don't require human intervention. So a lot of people are excited about SMR capabilities and the ability to use them for some of these plants. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where I see it. I mean, it is expensive, and it does require a lot of power. There is ongoing work. These industries, they require a lot of power. There's a lot of really smart people. Maybe this brings people in to really solve a lot of these questions.
Thinking about the difference of Nebraska and access and how we generate energy. We've got solar and wind and Big River. We've got the Missouri right next to Omaha, Nebraska. But that's fascinating. I would never have thought that the Niagara Falls was a power source. Just never occurred to me. But it also like made me think, when you talk about nuclear power, like 3 Mile Island, and how it's sort of sedentary and unused for many, many years. And now they're talking about kicking it back off and starting it back up and using it specifically for something like this, right? To support the growth in this AI space. And hopefully, we've figured some things out now. So meltdowns are less likely, and we can, have smaller nuclear power sources that are less likely to have a catastrophic event associated with them. So anything else on that front around the nuclear plants and kind of what you've heard? And is that a reality? Is 3 Mile Island definitely going to come
No, I
back
mean,
online?
from my perspective, like I don't know that these have been really deployed or in production use anywhere, but they are being developed. I know there are some government contracts out there for building out nuclear facilities for SMR production. So it's not out of the box ready yet, but I think it'll be coming in the next few years.
Well, let's close out on this topic then. What do you think that looks like over time? So you talked earlier in our conversation about training and the difference between training and actual use. So like consumer usage, if you will, or business usage. Is there a massive difference in what it takes to support training models versus what it takes to support day-to-day use of the models for business purposes or consumer purposes?
Yeah, good question. It's funny because it's changed, it's shifted over time. Right now, this like it kind of follows this 80-20 rule. So the International Energy Agency estimates that right now inference takes up 80% of the environmental footprint, with training taking up the other 20%. Google and Meta are reporting similar numbers. And this is like a definite, it's a big shift from the earlier years where the training was the primary energy consumer. This is probably to do with two big things. One is like we're all using it now, right? So the widespread deployment and frequent use of AI models have made inference the dominant factor. And then, like I said, like these reasoning models at inference time are way more expensive. And that is because they are designed to be much more explicit and explanatory. So they are this long chain of thought results that can be thousands of tokens. A lot of times reasoning models as well, they could potentially be parallel pathing. So, generating a couple different answers and then using something to pick among those options. So the inference itself is becoming a more complex task.
For the lay person out there, what is the inference? What does that mean in common man terms? Because I've seen your example in result sets from ChatGPT saying, do you like this answer or this answer? Where instead of having a simultaneous query and
inference you can just think of as like runtime. Like training is training the model before it's released, before you ever use it. The inference engine is the real-time usage. And so for a typical LLM, it really is just that GPT interface. You ask something, it responds. When you broaden to the world of agents, it's a more complex task, so there's more complex things going on under the hood. It takes more compute.
Exciting times. What did we miss? Anything that we need to close out and touch on, or any final thoughts before we end this session?
No, I feel like we covered a lot. I don't have anything else. Watch out for some vibe coding applications.
All right, we'll do. And we'll talk again soon. So thank you again for coming back around. It's good always to catch up with you and get the data scientist expert perspective. So appreciate your time and be good and have a great spring. Hopefully it warms up for both of us quickly.
For sure. Yeah, it's cold here. But thanks for having me. It was really good to have this talk, Neil.